I drove slowly through the snow-covered streets of Columbus, Ohio, my heart uneasy. I am Mark Sullivan, 37 years old, the owner of a small but stably operating logistics company. I never thought there would come a day when I would return to my parents' house on Christmas Eve. For many years, I hadn't been invited. The phone calls grew rarer, birthday wishes arrived late and perfunctory, and an invisible distance quietly widened between us as if no one had the courage to touch it anymore. I wondered why this year my parents had suddenly called, their voices unusually warm, inviting me home for Christmas dinner. Was it a belated gesture of reconciliation, or was it because they needed something? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to push away the negative thoughts. After all, this was family. I should give it a try. When I parked in front of the old house, the twinkling Christmas lights from the windows made my heart beat faster. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and the biting cold wind cut into my skin. The door swung open before I could knock, and my father, Patrick Sullivan, stood there with a wide smile. "Mark, son, you're finally home." He hugged me tightly, patting my back roughly as if there had never been any distance between us. My mother, Eileen, rushed out from the kitchen, flour still dusting the apron in her hands. "Oh, my dear Mark, I've missed you so much." She hugged me, the familiar scent of baked goods mingling with the perfume from my childhood. I stiffened for a moment, caught off guard by this warmth. The last time we met 3 years ago, it had been a brief argument about money, and they had sent me away with cold words. Then Sean, my younger brother, appeared from the living room. He grinned broadly, throwing his arms around me like brothers who had never had any conflict. "Big bro Mark, it's been forever. How have you been? Come in, it's freezing." Sean patted my shoulder and pulled me inside. I looked at him, 32 years old, still with that quick-witted look, but now seeming more mature, or at least trying to appear so. We had once been close, but ever since I left home to stand on my own, Sean had always harbored some jealousy, making veiled remarks about how I was luckier. Now all of that seemed to have vanished. I forced a smile, trying to fit into the atmosphere. "I'm doing fine. How's everyone?" Inside, the house was warm, the aroma of roasted turkey filling the air. The Christmas tree sparkled with the old glass ornaments I remembered from childhood. The dining table was set beautifully, laden with food. Mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, pudding, and red wine shimmering in the candlelight. Everything was arranged thoughtfully, perfect like a pre-staged Christmas painting. I sat down, a warmth rising in my chest. Maybe they really wanted to mend things. After years of estrangement, perhaps this was the chance for us to start over. "The house looks so cozy," I said, both to break the initial silence and to convince myself. Dinner began, and the atmosphere was livelier than I had expected. Dad raised his glass, his voice hearty. "Let's toast to Christmas. To my eldest son, Mark, who built a logistics empire from nothing with his own 2 hands." He laughed loudly, his eyes sparkling. I was surprised. Dad had rarely praised me before. He used to only criticize me for abandoning the family to chase my career. Mom nodded and added, "That's right, son. I'm so proud of you. Your company is so big now, with lots of employees and stable, not like in the early days when you struggled alone." She looked at me affectionately, leaving me confused. I nodded, smiled lightly, and thanked them politely. Sean was more enthusiastic than ever. He kept refilling my wine glass, asking about my work. "Bro, tell me, how's the logistics business? I heard you landed big contracts with some shipping companies. That's awesome." His tone was open, with none of the old jealousy. We talked about football, Ohio's harsh weather, and childhood memories. Sean shared about his part-time job, laughing loudly at his small failures. Everything felt as if there had never been any conflict. I laughed along, but deep down a strange feeling crept in. Why had everyone changed so suddenly? The cheerfulness was there, but I sensed the strain. My parents' smiles were a bit forced. Sean's eyes darted away when I probed deeper about his life. It was as if they were all performing a play and I was the unwilling audience. I tried to enjoy it, savoring the tender turkey, listening to Christmas music drifting from the old radio. But the more we ate and talked, the more uneasy I became. My parents kept repeating how successful I was, as if steering the conversation towards something. Mom said sweetly, "You know, Mark, our family is lucky to have you. Sean is still young and needs time. But you're already solid." Sean nodded and poured more wine for me. "Yeah, bro, you're the pillar of the family." I smiled, but my heart beat faster. Something wasn't right. Dinner ended and the plates were cleared quickly. The room suddenly fell silent, only the howling wind outside the window. Dad sat up straight, his face serious, the earlier smile gone. Mom looked down at the table, twisting her napkin. Sean sat quietly, his eyes fixed on me with anticipation. My chest tightened. Here it was, the real moment. Dad spoke in a low voice. "Mark, there's something I need to talk to you about." I swallowed, trying to stay calm. "Yes, Dad, go ahead." Dad cleared his throat and looked me straight in the eye. "Sean needs money to buy a house. He's about to start a family and needs a proper, stable place to live. Your mom and I looked at one in the suburbs. It's about $500,000. We'll cover most of it. You just contribute $300,000, okay? You're the eldest and you're the most financially secure in the family. In the end, this is also your responsibility to the family." Dad's words hit me like a punch in the face. I froze, stunned for several seconds. $300,000. A huge sum. Enough for me to expand with a new shipping route, enough to ensure employee bonuses for years. I had never promised anything, yet they spoke as if it were my obvious duty. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't do that. I have my own financial plans. The company is expanding and I'm responsible for my employees. $300,000 is too much. I really can't afford it." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Dad's face turned red, his fist slamming the table. "What? You're refusing, Mark? Do you think that's acceptable? Are you really this selfish?" Before I could speak, Dad continued, his voice rising with anger. "How much have your mother and I sacrificed for you? Raising you, educating you, giving you the foundation for your success. And now, when the family needs you, you turn your back on your own brother?" Mom jumped in, her voice shrill with emotion. "You're ungrateful. Everything you have today comes from this family. Sean is about to start a family. He needs help and you just say no." She glared at me, eyes full of rage. "Who do you think you are to refuse? Do you think you're better than everyone now?" Dad snorted contemptuously, pointing at me. "You're a coward who only thinks about yourself. Look at your brother. He's worked just as hard as you, just didn't get as lucky." He gave a bitter laugh, his voice dripping with venom. "You talk about your hard work? Without your parents behind you, do you think you'd be where you are today? Or would you still be wandering the streets somewhere?" Mom burst into tears, tears streaming down, but her words unrelenting. "You've disappointed me so much, Mark. How can you be so calculating with your own brother? Sean is the youngest. He needs protection. And you're only thinking about money and your own interests." I sat still, my heart constricting, but said nothing more. I knew all too well, the more I defended myself, the more they would twist my words into proof of my selfishness. Sean stood beside them, never once intervening. He stayed silent, but his eyes flashed clear irritation, as if I had just betrayed something huge. Finally, Sean muttered, voice full of resentment. "You always talk about responsibility, but when it's the family's turn, you find excuses to back out." I looked at him, a heavy disappointment rising inside. This was my brother, the one who once shared everything with me, now just standing there waiting to benefit from my decision. Seeing I wouldn't budge, Dad stood up abruptly, his voice cold and cruel. "If you won't listen, then from now on this house has no son named Mark." He pointed straight at the door. "Get out, and don't come back." Mom nodded, tears still flowing, but her voice resolute. "Leave this house right now. I don't want to see you again." I stood up, my legs heavy. No arguing, no pleading. I quietly put on my coat and walked out. The Ohio wind whipped my face, snow falling thickly, blanketing the road in white. But the real cold didn't come from winter. It came from the moment I realized I had just been disowned by my own family on Christmas Eve. I drove home, tears falling silently. Why did it turn out like this? I had hoped for reconciliation but received only betrayal. That night I lay awake thinking about the past. From childhood I had always yielded to Sean, always shouldered the burden. Now they wanted me to sacrifice again. But no, this time I wouldn't. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew refusing was the right decision. And perhaps it was only the beginning of the storm. The days after Christmas passed in heavy silence. I avoided calling my parents and they made no effort to contact me. Work at the logistics company became my only anchor. I threw myself into shipments, meetings with employees, and expansion plans. Each morning I woke up with a hollow feeling, but I told myself to stay strong. "You've been on your own for years, Mark," I muttered while looking in the mirror. My face looked weary with dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights. I thought about Sean, my younger brother, and his irritated expression that night. Did he really need the money that badly? Or was it just his habit of being spoiled? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. Life had to go on. About a month later, on a late January afternoon, I returned to the office after a long meeting. On my desk, amid a pile of contract paperwork, was a thick envelope from the Franklin County Court, the county where my parents lived. My heart pounded as I saw the sender's address. Probably some legal paperwork related to the company, I reassured myself, but my hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a summons accompanied by a lawsuit filing. I skimmed through it and the world around me seemed to stop. Plaintiffs, Patrick and Eileen Sullivan, my parents. They were suing me? I froze, collapsing into my chair, holding the papers in disbelief. This was my family. How could they do this? I opened the complaint, my hands still shaking. The allegations hit me like a blow. I had promised to contribute $500,000 toward buying a house for Sean, and because I failed to fulfill it, my parents had taken out loans and made a deposit, resulting in severe financial losses. $500,000. On Christmas Eve, they had only asked for $300,000. I was stunned, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of it. They claimed I had committed through conversations, emails, and text messages, that my refusal had plunged them into debt, caused them to lose the deposit, and now they were demanding full compensation plus interest. My chest tightened as if being crushed. I had never promised anything like that. Christmas Eve was the first time they mentioned it, and I refused immediately. How could they fabricate this? Attached to the complaint was a thick stack of documents, printed excerpts of text messages and emails quoted out of context. I flipped through them, my eyes widening in shock. A message from me 2 years ago. "If you need anything, I'll help if I can." They had spliced it with another email. "I'll support the family." No context, incomplete dates. They were distorted to appear as specific promises about the house money. The witness list consisted entirely of relatives and acquaintances. My uncle, aunt, even old neighbors. They would testify that I had verbally promised to help Sean. I was reeling, sitting there like a statue. The story in the complaint was completely alien, like a bad movie script. I knew for certain I had never promised or agreed to any amount. This was pure fabrication. The fact that my own parents had orchestrated such a case left me numb. This was no longer a family conflict. It was deliberate, planned betrayal. They had sat down together, gathered evidence, contacted a lawyer, and pushed it to court. How could they? I thought about Sean, and a suspicion crept in. Was he staying out of it? Or was he the one instigating it? I remembered his expression on Christmas Eve, silent but full of expectation. Maybe he knew everything, even participated. My heart ached as if being cut. Family, the thing I once thought was blood-bound, had now become the enemy. I sat there for hours staring at the papers, tears streaming down again. What are you going to do now, Mark? I asked myself. The next morning, I called the company's longtime lawyer, Tom Hargrove, a middle-aged man with extensive experience in civil litigation. We met at a coffee shop near the office. I slid the stack of documents across the table, my voice trembling. Please take a look. This is from my parents. Tom flipped through them, his brow furrowing. After half an hour, he looked up. Mark, this is a serious lawsuit. They're alleging breach of contract, an oral agreement. But on closer inspection, the evidence shows clear signs of manipulation. The messages are quoted out of context, the surrounding details distorted. The witness statements seem coordinated and biased. They've likely been coached on what to say. I listened, my heart racing. He continued, even though much of the evidence is fabricated or weak, it's still enough to create legal pressure. The court will summon you. You'll have to appear, hire defense counsel. This could drag on for months, costing a lot: lawyer fees, court costs, and most importantly, your reputation. In the business world, a lawsuit like this can make people wary. I swallowed hard, realizing the gravity. It wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing everything I'd built. Tom advised, we need to prepare a strong counter-argument and prove this is fabricated. But Mark, brace yourself. This is your family, yet they're playing dirty. I left the coffee shop with my mind spinning. On the drive home, I realized my parents weren't just angry. They were determined to take it to court, willing to do anything to make me pay for my refusal. They wanted me to regret it, to beg. I pulled over, breathing heavily. How can they be so cruel? I whispered. Memories flooded back. Dad teaching me to ride a bike, Mom hugging me when I fell. Now it was all shattered. I called my best friend, pouring it all out, my voice breaking. They're suing me, man. My own family is suing me. He comforted me, but my heart remained in turmoil. While I was still trying to steady myself and figure out how to respond, local media started sniffing out the lawsuit. One morning, I opened an email from an employee with a link. Boss, there's an article about you. I clicked it and my heart sank. The local paper, the Columbus Dispatch, had published. Local businessman sued by parents for breaching financial promise. They detailed the complaint, quoted the allegations, and even interviewed an anonymous source, likely a relative. The story spread rapidly on local social media. Comments poured in. How awful, unfilial child. When family sues each other, the world has gone mad. My image in the business community was now questioned, even without a verdict. Who was I? A trustworthy boss or an ingrate? Business partners quickly sensed the risk. That afternoon, the first email arrived from a major supplier. Mark, we've heard about the lawsuit. Please confirm your and the company's legal situation so we can assess risk. I replied briefly, but anxiety filled me. Then a call from another partner. Mark, the contract we're negotiating. We need to pause. We have to reassess stability. My ears rang as I listened. A few other deals were suspended with vague reasons. We need more time to review. I sat in my office, staring out the window at the falling snow. My company, the one I'd built over years from a small garage to a modern fleet of trucks, was now at risk of collapsing because of a fabricated lawsuit. I realized I wasn't just facing a civil lawsuit, but the threat of losing my personal reputation and the company's stability. Loyal employees, trusting clients, all could vanish. I called Tom again. The media is killing me, he reassured me. We'll fight back strongly. But Mark, stay calm. Easier said than done. That night I lay awake thinking about the future. This lawsuit was like a ticking time bomb, and I was at the center of the storm. Sean, my parents, did they consider the consequences? Or did they just want me to suffer? I clenched my fists in determination. You'll fight to the end, Mark. But deep down, fear still crept in. This was only the tip of the iceberg. The months waiting for the trial were the longest stretch of time in my life. Each day passed like slow torture. filled with emails from partners, local news articles still subtly referencing the case, and worried calls from employees about the company's future. I chose absolute silence. No comments on social media, no responses to interviews from local press, no explanations to anyone outside my closest circle. I knew full well that at this moment, even a single emotional reaction could be twisted against me. A Facebook status could be dug up and interpreted as an admission of guilt. Any interview could be edited to make me look like I was attacking my own family. My lawyer, Tom, had given me one simple but cold piece of advice. Silence is golden. And I followed it, even though anger boiled inside me. I gritted my teeth through the whispers behind my back, the scrutinizing looks from old partners, people who once trusted me but now kept their distance as if waiting to see when I would collapse. Every day was heavy, but I understood it was the price I had to pay. The injustice could suffocate me, but reacting wrongly now would only make things worse. Staying silent, enduring, and not letting emotions guide me. That was the only way to avoid pouring more fuel on the smoldering fire. Instead of wasting time justifying myself to the public, I poured all my focus into working with my lawyer. Every afternoon, I went to Tom's office, spending hours reviewing files, analyzing every spliced text message and distorted email. Tom pointed to one page. "Look here, Mark. This message is from 2023 about fixing Sean's car, not about buying a house." They cut out the preceding part to make it look like a financial promise. I nodded, taking careful notes filled with rage but also determination. We prepared a detailed defense strategy, hiring a digital forensics expert to prove document tampering, gathering statements from my friends to rebut claims. Step by step, we dismantled the allegations, turning what they called ironclad evidence into inconsistent fragments. I didn't try to prove my innocence to the public. That would be pointless right now. I focused only on the courtroom where legal truth mattered. Late at night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the towering pile of paperwork, wondering, how did my family end up like this? Childhood memories flooded back, family picnics, echoing laughter. Now only pain remained. Finally, the trial day arrived on a chilly April morning in Columbus. I drove to the Franklin County Courthouse, my heart pounding like a drum. The atmosphere outside was already tense. A few local reporters lingered, hoping to capture dramatic moments. I wore a black suit, trying to appear calm, but my hands were ice cold. Inside the courtroom, the air was even more stifling. Dark wood paneling, stiff seats, and the judge looming high above. I sat on the defendant's side with Tom beside me. Then they entered, Dad Patrick, Mom Eileen, and Sean. The people who were once my family now stood on the opposite side, faces stern, avoiding my gaze. Dad wore an old shirt, Mom a shawl. Sean kept his head down, looking thinner. My chest tightened. Was this real? We had once sat together at the Christmas dinner table. Now we faced each other like enemies. I looked at Sean, hoping for a regretful glance, but he avoided me. The tension was so thick I could hear the wall clock ticking clearly. The trial began, and their lawyer, a middle-aged man named Harris with a warm, deep voice, presented the story of a betrayed promise. He stood, voice full of emotion. "Your Honor, this is a story about family, about responsibility, about sacred promises between brothers." The defendant, Mark Sullivan, committed to helping his brother Sean buy a house with $500,000. The plaintiffs, Mr. Patrick and Mrs. Eileen, relied on that promise to borrow money and make a deposit, and now they suffer severe financial losses. He presented what he called evidence. Stacks of spliced messages, quoted emails, and witness statements. Uncle John took the stand, voice trembling. "I heard Mark say he would help Sean buy a house at a family gathering last year." Aunt Mary followed. "He always promised to support the family." Their arguments were built to appeal to emotion and morality, emphasizing family duty over clear legal grounds. "This isn't just about money," Harris concluded. "It's about broken trust, about a son turning his back on his parents." The courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded thoughtfully, and I felt the pressure. not from the law but from words that touched the heart. Then it was Tom's turn to rebut. He stood, voice calm but sharp. "Your Honor, this accusation rests on flimsy, manipulated, and distorted evidence." He pointed out inconsistencies one by one. "This message is from 2023 about car repairs, not a house. That email has altered dates. We have a digital report proving it." He called the expert to the stand who demonstrated the tampering. "Vague oral promises cannot be legally binding without a clear contract," Tom emphasized. "There is no specific evidence of the $500,000 amount, only emotional speculation." Faced with these rebuttals, the plaintiff's story gradually revealed its fragility and lack of legal foundation. Harris tried to salvage it, but the judge shook his head. I sat there, heart racing, watching my parents, their faces shifting from confidence to anxiety. Sean bowed his head lower as if he knew everything was crumbling. After a short recess, the court ruled, "There is insufficient legal basis to hold the defendant, Mark Sullivan, liable. The claim for compensation is dismissed and the defendant is declared the prevailing party." The gavel struck and the room buzzed. Tom patted my shoulder. "Congratulations, Mark. We won." I left the courtroom in silence, feeling none of the relief I had once imagined. There was no victorious smile, no sense of liberation. The verdict only closed the legal chapter, dismissing the claims and confirming I had no obligation to pay. But it couldn't erase what had happened before. The published articles, the skeptical looks, the suspended contracts due to damaged reputation. Before walking away, I glanced one last time at my parents and Sean. They stood there, faces pale, no one saying a word. Dad shook his head slightly, Mom quietly wiped tears, and Sean kept his face down, avoiding my eyes. We had once been a family. Now in that cold courtroom, we were just strangers who had passed through each other's lives. Immediately after the trial, the suspicions around me didn't vanish. They continued to spread in the local business community. The press reported, "Businessman Mark Sullivan wins lawsuit against family, but ethical questions remain." Online comments, "Winning legally doesn't mean being morally right." Some long-term clients gradually reduced cooperation. A shipping company I had worked with for years called, voice cautious. "Mark, we need to pause some shipments for now to reassess trustworthiness." Ongoing projects were delayed one by one with familiar vague excuses. "We're concerned about risk." No one said it outright, but I knew they were waiting to see how things would play out. I called a meeting with employees, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everyone, we won the case. But the road ahead will be tougher and we'll need to work twice as hard." The room applauded, cheers of encouragement for each other. But looking around, I could clearly see the worry in their eyes, for their jobs, their future, and the trust being tested daily. New partners became more cautious, demanding extra safeguards or prolonging negotiations. A meeting with potential investors. "Mark, we like the expansion idea, but the lawsuit, we need more documentation proving stability." I explained, but they still hesitated. The reputation I had built through years of disciplined work, staying up all night planning, sacrificing vacations to care for employees, was now covered in a layer of doubt, even though I had won legally. I sat alone in my office, looking out at the gray Ohio sky, wondering, how long will it take to wash away this stain? I understood that I had won legally, but the price was lingering suspicion, wary glances, and a long road ahead to restore credibility for myself and the company. In the nights that followed, I lay awake thinking about Sean. Did he regret it? Or did he still think I was selfish? The company was reeling. Revenue down 15%, employees anxious. I called Tom, my voice low. "We won, so why do I still feel like I lost?" On the other end, he sighed softly. "That's how life is sometimes, Mark. Winning in the courtroom doesn't mean winning in life. Now your job is to rebuild, one step at a time." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Deep inside, a new resolve slowly formed, slow, cautious, but unshakable. Yet beneath it all, the pain still smoldered. The lawsuit was over, but the wounds it left had only just begun to bleed. In the weeks following the trial, I tried to focus on rebuilding the company. Revenue was still declining, but I began to see positive signs. A few old partners called back inquiring about new shipments, though their voices still carried a hint of caution. I held employee meetings more frequently, encouraging them. "We've weathered the storm. Now it's time to rebuild." They smiled and applauded, but I knew deep down they were still worried. And me? I tried to push memories of my parents and Sean out of my mind, focusing on work. Every morning I jogged around the lake near my house, breathing in the crisp Ohio air, telling myself that time would heal everything. But then, on an ordinary day like any other, everything collapsed again. One afternoon in May, I was at the bank processing a credit line extension for the company. My logistics firm needed additional capital to buy new trucks and expand routes, an essential step to offset the damage from the lawsuit. I sat in the familiar bank office with the loan officer, Lisa, who had handled my files for years. She typed on her keyboard, smiling politely, then suddenly stopped. Her expression shifted from friendly to confused. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry, but your application is on hold for review." I raised an eyebrow, forcing a smile. "Why? Is there an issue with the company paperwork?" She shook her head, her voice lowering. "It's not the company, sir. There's a serious issue with your personal credit. The system flags it as high risk." I froze, feeling as if the floor were giving way beneath me. "What issue? I've always paid on time." Lisa looked at the screen, then at me. "It appears there are several personal loans in your name that are past due. I can't disclose details right now, but you should check your credit report." My heart raced wildly. Past due personal loans? I had never taken out anything beyond my home mortgage and company credit. "Are you sure? I haven't signed any new loans." She nodded, sounding apologetic. "The system doesn't make mistakes, sir. You can request a detailed report." I left the bank with my mind reeling, clutching the notice of suspension. What was this? Another administrative error? But a bad premonition surged like an undercurrent. That same day, I contacted the bank's credit department, demanding a detailed report and full history of any loans tied to my Social Security number. After hours of tense waiting, a secure email finally arrived. I sat motionless in front of my computer screen, taking a deep breath before opening the PDF, as if a single click could unleash truths I wasn't ready to face. And then, the world collapsed once more. The report listed 3 personal loans in my name. One for $150,000, 2 smaller ones totaling $200,000, all several months past due. The principal plus interest came to nearly $400,000. I sat stunned, reading it over and over, my hands trembling. These loans, I had never signed for them, never used them, never even known about them. They had been opened 6 months ago, right after that Christmas night. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my heart pounding as if it might burst. I traced the details in the report. The loan origination dates, January of this year, the registered address, a familiar one in the Columbus suburbs where my parents lived. Contact information, Dad's old phone number, Mom's email. Nothing linked to my current address or job. My heart seemed to stop. I called the bank immediately, my voice shaking. "I need copies of the loan files. I suspect fraud." They agreed to send them after verifying my identity. 2 hours later, the files arrived. I opened them and the truth hit me in the face. Forged signatures, shaky strokes, nothing like my bold, straight handwriting. Supporting details like income and work address had been deliberately filled in to bypass verification. They used old information from when I still lived with the family. I scrutinized the statements for the loans in my name, each transaction appearing on the screen like knife cuts. And then I saw it. A wire transfer for a home purchase deposit, $100,000, executed right after the loans were disbursed. Recipient address, a real estate company in the area Sean had once mentioned. Everything connected. I understood clearly that my parents had used my social security number to take out loans to buy a house for Sean, exploiting the personal information they had known for years. My SSN, date of birth, financial history. They knew it all because I had shared it when I was younger. That truth left me both numb and furious, like a bomb exploding in my chest. I collapsed into my chair, gasping for breath, tears streaming down. How could they? How could they cross the final line of family trust without hesitation? This was no longer a conflict, it was a crime, identity theft. In that moment, old memories flooded back like a torrent, drowning me in pain and anger. From childhood, I had always been the one to yield. I remembered when I was 8, Sean got a shiny new bicycle while I used my cousin's hand-me-down. "You're the older one, you should let your brother have it," Dad said, his tone allowing no argument. I nodded, swallowing my tears because I loved my little brother. At 12, when I wanted guitar lessons, Mom said, "Sean is sick. We need the money for medicine first." My own needs were often pushed aside. All attention prioritized Sean. He was frail, cried easily, needed protection. I was assumed to be the one who could endure and fend for myself. "Our Mark is strong," they would say, as if that meant I didn't need care. At 18, I left home early to become independent, working part-time to pay for college. They didn't help. They even blamed me. "You made that choice without thinking of the family?" Meanwhile, every mistake Sean made, failing classes, getting into trouble, was covered up and excused. "He's still young. He'll grow out of it," Mom would say, hugging him close. Even when I built a solid career, my success was never truly acknowledged, only brought up when the family needed money or sacrifice. Like 3 years ago when Sean lost his job, they called, "Send some money to help your brother." I sent it, but my heart was filled with resentment. Those fragments of memory now formed a clear picture. Taking out loans in my name wasn't an impulse. It was the culmination of years of disregard and exploitation. I had always been the one to carry the load, while Sean was the one to receive. Now they had plunged me into debt to rescue him. I realized that if I continued to stay silent, I wouldn't just lose money or reputation. I would keep being dragged deeper into a vicious cycle I hadn't created. My company would collapse because my personal credit was destroyed, employees would lose jobs, futures would shatter. "No," I whispered, clenching my fists. For the first time in my life, I made a decision that clear. I would no longer avoid it nor continue enduring to preserve a false peace. I had been silent long enough, retreated far enough, and the price of that endurance was too high. From this moment on, I chose to stand up for myself, clear-headed, calm, and ready to protect myself by whatever means necessary, even if it meant confronting the people I once called family. Anger surged through me like a storm, impossible to contain. After uncovering the truth about the fraudulent loans, I couldn't just sit still. I printed out copies of the loan files and detailed bank documents, transaction statements, forged signatures, matching addresses, and stuffed them all into a black briefcase. It was already dark, but I couldn't wait until morning. I drove straight to my parents' house in the Columbus suburbs, the cold Ohio night wind whipping my face through the slightly open window. My heart pounded, not from fear but from rage, so intensely that my knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "They have to face this," I whispered. The old house appeared under the dim streetlights, the Christmas tree still there like a bitter reminder of that fateful night. I parked, took a deep breath, and knocked firmly. The door opened and my mother, Eileen, stood there with a surprised expression. "Mark, why are you here so late? Is something wrong?" Her voice trembled, but I didn't let her continue. I stepped inside despite her astonishment, closed the door, and looked her straight in the eye. My father, Patrick, was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee. He looked up, frowning. I didn't greet them or beat around the bush. I opened the briefcase, pulled out the thick stack of papers, and placed each bundle on the dining table. "Explain this to me," I said slowly. "These loans are in my name, with forged signatures. and the disbursed funds were transferred directly to an account used for a down payment on a house for Sean. What have you done? My voice was calm to the point of icy, even though a raging wave was rising inside me. Their reaction was immediate and fierce, just as I had anticipated. Dad slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed red. What? What nonsense are you talking about? We haven't done anything. You've misunderstood. Mom jumped in right away, her voice shrill with panic. Mark, you're overthinking this. It must be a bank error. How dare you suspect your own parents? She paused for a beat, staring at me. The lawsuit changed you, didn't it? Do you really think we would harm our own son? They denied everything completely, their voices full of indignation, as if I were the one making baseless accusations. Dad pointed straight at me, his voice growling. You dare barge in here in the middle of the night just to accuse us? Have you forgotten who we are to you? I stood still, my heart aching, but I didn't back down. I knew this script. Deny first, attack later. I pulled out a few more sheets and pushed them toward them. Here are copies of the loan files, disbursement history, contact addresses, and the signatures. Everything matches. This isn't a mistake. The denial suddenly turned into heavy silence. Dad stared at the papers, his face gradually paling. Mom collapsed into a chair, hand over her mouth. The air in the room grew thick, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock. Then Dad cleared his throat, his voice quieter, no longer aggressive. All right, since you already know everything, I'll be straight with you. It was a last resort decision. We had no other choice. He looked up at me, his eyes mixing fatigue and reproach. Sean needed a house. You refused to help. We thought you'd handle it somehow, like you've always done. Mom burst into tears, sobbing. I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. But I was only thinking about Sean's future. Your brother has suffered so much, you know that. She continued through sobs. We were just borrowing temporarily. When things get better, we'll figure out how to pay you back. As soon as she finished, I clenched my fists, then slowly raised my head and looked them straight in the eye. I repeated, my voice low but sharp. Borrowing temporarily? You call forging my signature, taking out loans in my name, and transferring the money directly to a down payment for Sean's house, borrowing temporarily? Dad frowned. Don't talk so harshly. We're family. We solve things together. I shook my head, giving a bitter smile. No, Dad. Family means asking me first and respecting my answer. This was a decision made behind my back, forcing me to bear the consequences. Mom wiped her tears, looking at me as if I were the betrayer. You're acting like we deliberately tried to harm you. How could we ever hurt our own flesh and blood? Before I could respond, Dad growled, arms crossed. You're not struggling for anything. Why make such a big deal out of it? You've managed fine all these years. Why are you so tense now? I looked up, meeting his gaze. Because this time you used my identity. Dad snorted coldly, voice full of irritation. It's just a few loans. You're making it sound so serious. You'll handle it, no big deal. Mom added, crying and blaming at the same time. You're acting like we exploited you. Our family has always relied on each other. Why are you calculating everything like an outsider? I gave a bitter laugh. Relying on each other doesn't mean signing my name without permission and taking out loans in my name. Dad furrowed his brow, voice grumpy. You've really changed. Ever since the lawsuit, you look at us with suspicion. I replied, each word clear. I haven't changed. This is the first time I'm refusing to be taken for granted. Mom shook her head, her voice almost pleading but still demanding. You're the eldest. You have to understand for the family. If not you carrying the load, then who? I stood up, my heart constricting but my voice steady. It's precisely because I've always carried it that everyone thinks it's their right. The room fell silent, not because they understood, but because for the first time I refused to yield. I turned and walked away, leaving behind stunned faces, realizing for the first time that the son they had always seen as their default pillar would no longer accept being sacrificed again. That night I barely slept, lying awake in bed, replaying what had happened over and over. Images of my parents justifying themselves spun in my mind. If I continued to hesitate, I would keep being dragged into consequences I hadn't caused. Mounting debt, a collapsing company, ruined reputation. The next morning I got up early and called Tom. Gather all the evidence from the bank, credit reports, disbursement history. I'm filing a lawsuit for identity theft. He agreed immediately. Good, Mark. This is the right move to hold them accountable. I officially filed the lawsuit in court with ironclad evidence, bank reports, forged signatures, direct money transfers. The waiting weeks were hell. Media flared up again. Partners grew even more hesitant. But I stayed calm and prepared thoroughly. The trial took place on a July morning, the courtroom atmosphere stifling. My parents and Sean were there, their faces pale when they saw me. My lawyer presented irrefutable evidence. Forged signatures, funds transferred directly to a third party, matching timelines and locations. This is intentional identity theft, Tom emphasized. Their side tried to justify it, but the judge shook his head. The court ruled that Patrick and Eileen had deliberately stolen my identity to obtain loans, ordering them to repay the full borrowed amount, compensate for financial damages, cover legal costs, and pay statutory penalties. Beyond repayment, their credit records were severely flagged, effectively barring future borrowing. Their personal assets faced potential seizure to enforce the judgment, and their community reputation suffered heavy damage. The price they paid wasn't just financial. It was the direct consequence of years of blind favoritism and taking my sacrifices for granted. As I left the courtroom, I understood that the final tie binding me to my old family had been officially severed, and from that moment I no longer had any obligation to bear the wrong choices of others. I stepped out into the Ohio sunshine, feeling relief for the first time, but also a deep emptiness. A new life was beginning without them. In the days immediately following the trial, I tried to adjust to that unfamiliar sense of freedom. The company office became my refuge, a place where I could focus on what remained: employees, contracts, and the future. I avoided thinking about my parents and Sean, shoving them into a dark corner of my mind. But then, local media began publishing corrections like a rain shower washing away the layer of grime. The Columbus Dispatch, the same paper that had covered the first lawsuit, now ran a major article. Businessman Mark Sullivan vindicated an identity theft case. Parents ordered to pay compensation. They quoted the court ruling, emphasized the irrefutable evidence, and even interviewed Tom to clarify the details. The articles spread across local social media, and gradually the previous negative comments were replaced by sympathy. He was the victim. Poor guy. My personal and company reputation slowly stabilized, like a storm-tossed ship finally finding safe harbor. I received emails from old partners. "Mark, we read the news. Sorry for hesitating. Let's grow together again." A warmth flickered in my heart, not from forgiveness, but from knowing that years of hard work hadn't been in vain. Some clients returned to cooperate, and previously stalled projects resumed. Like the major transportation deal with the manufacturer in Cleveland, they called, sounding remorseful. "Mark, we were wrong. Let's sign the new contract. We need your fleet." I nodded, signed the papers, and watched revenue start to climb. My life began returning to normal, waking up early, meetings, checking shipments, and coming home to a simple dinner. Not long after, I noticed Sean constantly bragging on social media about his lavish lifestyle. Luxury shopping, travel, far beyond his previous financial means. One post, Sean posing next to a new sports car, caption, "Life is for enjoying. Luxury life." Another, a photo of him at a high-end resort holding a cocktail with a Gucci bag peeking out. "Europe trip. Who's coming?" Jet set. Before, Sean had odd jobs, earning just enough to get by. Now he was buying designer goods and jetting around. I tried to ignore it, but suspicion gnawed at me. Maybe he hit the lottery, I told myself, but a bad feeling kept rising. On one occasion, while passing through the area where Sean lived, I had a delivery nearby. I realized he was still in that same rundown rental. I parked far away and observed from a distance. Small apartment, peeling paint, no signs of moving or a new house purchase. Sean stepped out wearing a designer polo shirt, but the place remained the same. Old furniture, no garage for a luxury car. My chest tightened. Why hadn't he bought a house? My parents had borrowed money, using my identity, to buy one for him, right? I drove away, my mind spinning. When I pieced together how much money my parents had spent on Sean supposedly for a house, his flashy lifestyle, and the unchanged living situation, I realized the borrowed funds intended for a home hadn't gone toward any house at all. Sitting in my office, I opened my laptop and reviewed his posts. Trips to Las Vegas, a gleaming Rolex watch, extravagant parties. The borrowed money, $450,000, had vanished into those things. Anger boiled inside me. Looking at the bigger picture, I saw clearly that Sean was sliding into indulgence and recklessness, completely unchecked, with no focus on building a stable life. He wasn't investing or learning, just showing off as if the money were endless. I remembered young Sean. Smart but always spoiled, never taught responsibility. Now the consequences were evident. Soon after, I started receiving questions from acquaintances about Sean borrowing money for business, while mentioning he was using my name and image to build trust. First came a call from Uncle John, the one who had testified against me. "Mark, your brother just borrowed money from me for a venture. He said he's partnering with you using your logistics company name as proof. Is this true?" I froze, my throat tightening. "No, Uncle. I have no idea about this." He went on. Sean had promised high returns from a so-called transportation project, even using my LinkedIn photos as evidence of a real partner backing him. My heart sank, a chill running through me. I suddenly understood that Sean wasn't just partying or irresponsible. He had fabricated an entire fake business story, painting pictures of quick profits to borrow and misappropriate others' money. Over time, more people approached me with the same concerns, bringing messages, documents, and promises Sean had made, revealing deliberate fraud. A relative sent a message. "Mark, your brother Sean borrowed $5,000 from me, saying it's for a startup with you. Here are the papers." I looked. Fake contracts bearing my name, promising returns in 3 months. Then Aunt Mary called, crying. "He used family photos, said you'd guarantee it." I lost $10,000. I sat there, hands shaking, reviewing the evidence, promising texts, transfers, and Sean disappearing when payments were due. This was systematic fraud, not a momentary mistake. Recognizing the severity, I went to my parents to warn them that Sean's actions had crossed ethical boundaries and would sooner or later lead to serious legal consequences. I drove to their house one evening, filled with concern. Dad opened the door, his face stone cold. "What are you doing here?" I stepped in and sat across from them. "Mom, Dad, I've heard about Sean. He's borrowing money everywhere, using my name to gain trust. This isn't simple. It could involve the law, even prison." I placed the stack of papers on the table. "Here's the evidence. Messages, photos, and statements from victims." Dad didn't even glance at it before brushing it off. "Stop it. You came here just to slander your brother, didn't you? After the lawsuit, you still won't let the family be?" Mom burst into tears, her voice desperate yet protective. "Sean's just going through a rough patch in business. He needs protection, not to be cornered by his own brother." I clenched my fists, my voice lowering. Protection doesn't mean covering up crimes. But Dad slammed his hand on the table, cutting me off. "Enough. If you keep saying things like this, don't ever set foot in this house again." I looked at them, my heart heavy. No one asked if Sean was wrong. Their only concern was who was shattering the facade they clung to. Faced with that blindness, I realized I had done all I could, and from this point on, Sean's downfall was no longer something I could rescue him from. I left the house, exhausted. Life went on, but Sean, he was digging his own grave. That week passed in a new, almost peaceful rhythm. I focused on the company, on the steady flow of shipments, on employees gradually regaining their morale. Local media slowly forgot the scandal, and I began to feel true freedom. No more calls from distant relatives, no more scrutinizing glances. Life in Columbus seemed to be returning to its track. Morning black coffee, afternoon meetings, evenings at home with a book. But then, on a late August morning, everything was stirred up again. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, scrolling through local news on my phone as usual. The screen displayed a headline from the Columbus Dispatch. Police investigate financial fraud involving multiple victims. Suspect Sean Sullivan arrested. I froze, the coffee cup nearly slipping from my hand. Sean's name, my brother's, bolded in the title. I skimmed the article, my heart pounding. It detailed how Sean was accused of fabricating non-existent business opportunities, using others' reputations to build trust, borrowing money and failing to repay. They listed specifics. Sean had promised investments in major logistics projects, using my name and company photos to deceive, borrowing a total of over $200,000 from relatives, friends, and even strangers via social media. Victims recounted, he used his brother's name, a successful businessman, to convince us. I sat there, breathing heavily, memories of my warning calls flooding back. Why hadn't he stopped? Why push it this far? That same day, my phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from relatives poured in like a flood. Aunt Mary. Mark, your brother's been arrested. Your parents are running around trying to find a lawyer. Uncle John. They're calling everyone for help, hoping to settle it and save Sean. From overlapping calls and fragmented complaints, I learned that my parents had tried using old connections to intervene, calling police friends, making promises to local lawyers. But this time, there was no way out. The case had gone beyond family matters, becoming a criminal investigation with multiple victims and clear evidence. A call from an acquaintance. Your parents are crying, saying Sean's innocent, but the police have proof. I listened, exhausted. They were still protecting him, still blind, but this time the law wouldn't forgive. I tried to keep my distance, but 2 weeks later, when Sean's case went to the initial hearing, I decided to attend the court as an observer. Not to intervene, but to witness firsthand the consequences of choices that had dragged on for so long. I drove to the county courthouse, my heart heavy. The courtroom was packed, victims in the front rows, my parents in a corner looking gaunt. Sean at the defendant's table, pale-faced, no longer boasting. I sat in the back, avoiding their eyes, filled with apprehension. The judge struck the gavel and the hearing began. At the hearing, the prosecutor presented comprehensive evidence. Statements from over 10 victims, relatives to strangers, describing how Sean approached them, promising high returns from business ventures with his brother. They showed messages, marks guaranteeing it, invest, double your money. Forged documents, contracts bearing my company's name, fake signatures. Financial trails proving Sean had misappropriated the money for personal use, transfers for cars, travel, luxury goods. The evidence was clear enough to dismiss any excuses, showing Sean's actions weren't momentary errors but systematic fraud, spanning months, targeting many people. The defense lawyer tried to salvage it. The defendant was merely facing financial difficulties, but the judge shook his head. I sat there, fists clenched, childhood memories rushing back. Sean crying for toys, me yielding, him making mistakes, parents covering. Now here were the consequences. The court sentenced Sean to 4 years in prison plus full restitution to the victims for the misappropriated amounts and probation after release. The gavel struck. The room buzzed. In the courtroom, my parents broke down in tears, collapsing under the verdict for the first time, facing head-on the results of years of indulgence. I stood and left the courtroom in silence. No schadenfreude, no relief. only a hollow feeling as everything had reached an irreversible point. I understood that from that moment Sean's path was sealed by the law and my family could no longer shield him from those mistakes. I drove home under the glaring Ohio sun, deep in thought. Life goes on, but the scars remain. 3 months after the trial, as the autumn leaves began to turn yellow, I decided to visit Sean in prison. Not out of family obligation, not out of pity or blood ties. I needed a clear, full stop to things that had dragged on for far too long. The years of yielding, the lawsuits, the repeated betrayals. I drove alone, the highway quiet and empty, the radio playing an old song. My heart beat faster as the prison came into view. High concrete walls, barbed wire, and a heavy atmosphere. I registered for the visit, went through security, my nerves on edge. Why am I doing this? But I knew. If I didn't face it, the wound would never heal. The prison visiting room was cold and stark. Glass partitions, hard plastic chairs. I sat waiting, hands clenched, and then Sean appeared. Gaunt, wearing a gray inmate uniform, eyes averted with no trace left of the boastful, carefree attitude he once displayed on social media. He sat down across from me. I picked up the phone receiver, my fingers trembling slightly, still unaccustomed to the feeling of confinement. Sean stared at me for a long time, his eyes mixing surprise and wariness before speaking. His voice hoarse from emotion and lack of sleep. I didn't think you'd actually come. After everything I've done. I paused for a moment, then lifted the receiver to my ear, my gaze fixed on the hollow face before me. When I spoke, I kept my voice low and steady, neither evasive nor overly gentle. I didn't come to reproach you or to make you feel better, I said slowly, each word clear. I came because I want to hear the truth from you at least once. Sean bowed his head, taking a deep breath as if gathering all his courage to continue. I was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you brush off. It's the kind where only now do I realize how much I've destroyed. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed, gazing at me like someone exhausted from running away. From childhood on, I was always shielded, Sean said slowly. When I messed up, someone fixed it. When I lacked something, someone filled the gap. Whatever I did, someone stepped in to bear the burden. I got used to living without consequences. He paused, swallowed hard, and continued, his voice dropping. I thought life was supposed to be like that. Just take the easy money, make promises to keep people calm. And there'd always be a way to sort it out later. Sean gripped the receiver tightly, knuckles white. I used your name because I knew people trusted you, he said bluntly without evasion. I knew it was dirty, cowardly, but at the time I only thought about getting money fast to keep living the way I was. I clenched my jaw but let him finish. Only when I got in here, Sean went on, his voice breaking, with no money, no parents to shield me, no one to call and rescue me. Only then did I realize that everything I thought was clever was just avoidance. Tears fell onto the glass table, his voice completely shattering. Bro, I'm sorry, Sean said with no defensiveness left. I dragged you into this, tarnished your name, made you suspected, and tore the family apart. He shook his head as if denying his own self. It wasn't your fault and it wasn't Mom and Dad's, Sean continued slowly and firmly. It was mine. All of it was my choice. I was silent for a long time before responding, my voice low but not cold. I've heard you, I said, each word falling slowly. And I believe this time you're not saying it to escape blame. I paused, then went on. But remorse doesn't erase consequences. You have to bear what you've done yourself, and no one, not even me, can carry it for you. Sean nodded repeatedly, tears streaming. I know. For the first time in my life, I know what it means to pay a price. Thank you for setting my wrongs aside to come visit. Please pass on my regards to Mom and Dad. The speaker announced the end of visiting time. Sean slowly hung up the receiver, looking at me one last time, eyes no longer evasive, only filled with regret and exhaustion. I nodded slightly as a form of acknowledgement, then stood and walked away. Stepping out of the prison, pale autumn sunlight fell on the cold concrete yard. A chilly wind blew, making me shiver. I knew Sean would serve 4 years, 4 years to learn responsibility, or 4 years to live with his own regret. I got in the car and drove straight away without looking back. Some lessons only arrive when the price is already too high and no one can pay it for another. Not long after, about 2 weeks, my parents came to my house unannounced, without the familiar demands or accusations of the past. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there they stood. Dad, Patrick, noticeably thinner. Mom, Eileen, with red-rimmed eyes, both looking much older than at the courthouse. Dad spoke first, his voice hoarse and cautious. "Can we talk for a bit?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, opening the door wider and inviting them in. They sat on the sofa, carrying the heavy silence of people finally forced to face their own consequences. No coffee, no prolonged greetings. Dad cleared his throat. "Mark, we were wrong." We sat at the dining table, the half-prepared dinner cooling in the silence. For a long while no one spoke until Dad cleared his throat again, as if summoning all his courage to begin. He looked at me, eyes red and weary. "Over this time we've reflected on a lot," he said slowly. "Looked back at the past, at how we treated you." He paused, his hand trembling slightly on the table. "And we have to admit we weren't fair to you, Mark." I didn't respond, just sat listening quietly. Dad continued, his voice lowering. "We always favored Sean, always thought he was weaker and needed more protection. And you, because you were strong, because you were independent, we automatically cast you as the one to shoulder everything, to yield and endure." He looked up at me, eyes full of remorse. "We got used to your silence, used to you handling things yourself, and because of that, we didn't realize we were hurting you." Mom broke into tears, her voice choked as she interjected. "I was wrong, Mark. I thought shielding Sean was love, but I didn't see that it made you suffer unfairly for years." She wiped her tears, looking at me with deep regret. "Only now do I realize that what you've carried since childhood wasn't as light as I once thought." Dad bowed his head, his voice breaking. "The lawsuits, the loans, all of it. We were blind. We thought that keeping the family together at any cost would make everything okay, but in the end, we put you in danger and let Sean slide further." He took a deep breath and continued. "Only when Sean went to prison did we truly understand a painful truth, that we had harmed both our sons." Mom nodded repeatedly, tears falling endlessly. "We didn't come here to ask you to carry anything more. I just want you to know that your pain is real and we were wrong not to see it sooner." She looked at me, voice trembling but sincere. "You don't have to forgive right away, but we can't stay silent anymore. We need to say it, to acknowledge what we caused you." The room fell silent. Not the heavy silence of blame, but the silence of things finally named properly, too late, but genuine. Facing my parents, I felt a mix of emptiness and exhaustion, because the words I had long waited for arrived only after everything was shattered. I sat there, listening, memories flooding back. Nights I struggled alone with work while they worried about Sean. Times my refusals were called selfish. "You're saying this too late," I whispered. Still, I noticed the anger inside me had turned into a kind of calm, as if I was finally recognized in my proper place in the family. No longer burning rage, just weariness and a touch of relief. I made no promises, set no conditions. I only understood that from this moment, if any relationship continued, it would have to be rebuilt on respect and clear boundaries. "I can't promise anything," I said slowly, "but if we meet again in the future, things have to be different." They nodded without arguing, then stood and left. I closed the door behind them, standing silently for a long while, letting the thoughts drift. Life continued at the company with daily tasks to handle, but the scar called family remained, quietly reminding me of lessons that came late but were necessary, so they would never be repeated again. After the successive upheavals, from the first lawsuit to the identity theft and then Sean's trial, I felt like a ship lost in a storm that had finally found harbor. But that harbor wasn't a place to rest. It was time to repair. I deliberately slowed my pace of life, no longer throwing myself into long-haul shipments or endless meetings. I took time to reorganize work, delegating smaller contracts to the deputy director, cutting hours to create breathing room. Prioritizing mental stability became my guiding principle. I started meditating each morning, jogging along the Scioto River, and even joined a support group for people who had experienced family conflicts. In the afternoons, I sat alone in the park, watching autumn leaves fall, reflecting on everything. How do wounds heal? How do I keep the past from dragging me back? Those questions repeated, making my heart race, as if the future still held surprises. The company gradually regained momentum. Projects ran more smoothly without unexpected crises pulling me away. Revenue rose 20% from the previous quarter thanks to resumed old contracts, and a few new partners who regained trust after reading the corrective articles in the press. I gathered the employees. Everyone, we've made it through. Now it's time to focus on the future. They applauded, and I saw confidence return to their eyes. No more urgent calls from lawyers, no more media hounding, just steady shipments, bills paid on time. I clearly felt the shift. The company was no longer a burden, but a source of joy, like a child I had nurtured through storms. During this period, I met Emily Carter, a calm, independent, and empathetic woman who brought me the sense of safety I had lacked for years. We met by chance at a logistics conference in Columbus. She managed supply chains for a major company with a warm smile and deep, thoughtful eyes. "I've heard a lot about your company," she said as we chatted over coffee. "After everything you've been through to rebuild it single-handedly, I've never seen anyone as strong as you." I smiled awkwardly, gave a brief account, and she listened without judgment. Subsequent dates came naturally, a dinner, a hiking trip, and gradually I opened up. Emily didn't pry into my past. She shared about her own life, her failures and successes, making me feel respected. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said one evening as we sat by the fireplace. My heart stirred. This was true safety without pressure or sacrifice. Our relationship developed slowly but steadily, built on respect and clear boundaries, utterly different from what I had witnessed in my old family. We took our time understanding each other, setting rules. No interfering in work unless necessary, respecting personal space. "You need time to heal," Emily said, and I agreed. Evenings we cooked together, laughed over small things, and I felt the thrill of new love, not the wild, passionate kind, but a solid, peaceful one. Unlike my old family where everything came with conditions, with Emily everything was free. I told her about Sean, about my parents, and she held me. "You made the right decisions." Warmth filled my heart, though I remained cautious. I didn't want to repeat old mistakes. After about a year together, we decided to marry in a simple, private ceremony, attended only by those truly close to us. It was an autumn afternoon in a small park near home, with an officiant, Emily, in a simple white dress and a few friends from the company. No extravagance, no big party, just brief vows. "I don't promise a perfect life, but I promise to always respect you, listen to you, and build each day together, even when it's not easy." Emily smiled, tears glistening. "I promise to stand by you without avoiding or giving up." The ceremony ended quickly. We had dinner at our usual spot, and that night, lying beside her, my heart raced with anticipation for the future. This was a new chapter, not to forget the past, but to move beyond it. A year after the wedding, we welcomed our first child, naming him Lucas, a completely new chapter in my life. Lucas was born on a spring morning. He cried loudly in the crib, and when I held him, my heart melted. "He has your eyes," Emily whispered, exhausted but happy. I named him Lucas, meaning light, because he brought light after darkness. Watching my son grow up in a home filled with love and respect, I clearly understood what true happiness meant. Family ties without pressure or blind sacrifice. Each morning I woke early to warm his bottle, played with him, taught him little things. "Daddy loves you," I said, and Lucas grinned widely. Unlike my childhood, where yielding was duty, here everything was equal and free. My parents visited occasionally, always cautious, no longer imposing or making demands as before. Each time they carried a clear hesitation, as if afraid stepping too close would damage the newly established boundaries. They came with small gifts, toys made of wood, and sat in the living room, undemanding. Dad looked at Lucas. "He looks like you when you were little." Mom wiped tears. "My grandson is so handsome." I received them calmly and politely, but not too intimately, because scars inside me hadn't fully faded. I poured water, made light conversation about the weather or work, but didn't delve into the past. There were moments watching them quietly play with their grandson when I saw unmistakable regret on their faces without words. Dad held Lucas' hands trembling, eyes red. Mom sang lullabies to him. I stood at a distance, emotions surging, uneasy, heartbroken, yet gentle. They were trying, but too late. Over time, my parents learned to respect those limits, accepting their new role in my life and my small family's. They visited less often, called to check in instead of demanding, and I saw them aging, gray hair, slower steps. Watching them try to change, I didn't forget the old wounds, the lawsuits, the betrayals, but I no longer felt the burning anger, only quietly maintaining the necessary boundaries to protect my emotions. "Have you forgiven them?" Emily asked one evening. I shook my head. "Not entirely, but I'm not angry anymore." I realized I was striving to be a different kind of father, not repeating a love that forced children to bear pressure or sacrifice themselves. With Lucas, I taught independence while always being there. No favoritism, no coercion. The boundaries I set with my parents didn't stem from resentment, but from a desire to safeguard the fragile peace of my small family. I didn't want Lucas to witness old conflicts or Emily pulled into them. "They're grandparents, but they must respect our home," I told Emily. She nodded. My new life wasn't perfect. There were still sleepless nights, memories resurfacing. But it was stronger, built on respect, freedom of choice, and clear responsibility. I watched Lucas sleep, my heart full of hope. This was the future I chose, and it was worth it. Time passed faster than I expected. Before I realized it, 4 years had gone by since Sean's trial. I received news of his release through a short call from Dad, his voice hoarse and terse as usual. "Sean's out, son." I was silent for a moment, then quietly replied that I already knew. When the call ended, I noticed how strangely calm I felt. No joy, no heaviness, just a sense of acceptance after so many years had passed. Sean returned with nothing to his name. No money, no unconditional protection as before. No luxury cars, no designer clothes, no boastful travel posts on social media. He rented a small room in the Columbus suburbs, taking odd jobs to get by. I didn't reach out proactively, but through the rare encounters, mostly arranged by our parents, I noticed Sean no longer carried that confident, showy air. Simple clothes, cautious demeanor, completely different from the person I once knew. The first time we met after his release at a coffee shop near our parents' house, Sean sat across from me holding a glass of water, eyes downcast. "I'm back. I know it sounds too simple, but I just want you to know I'm not the same anymore." His voice was soft without any boasting. I nodded approvingly, asked a few questions, and saw he had grown thinner, his skin tanned from manual labor. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I'm a warehouse worker, bro. Low pay, but enough to live." No complaints, no demands, just acceptance. I also noticed our parents no longer arranged everything or shielded Sean as they once did. They only helped with basics, a little money for food, advice over the phone. No more covering up or making excuses for him. "From now on, he'll have to manage himself," Dad said during one call, sounding weary. From their fragmented stories and brief meetings, I learned Sean was doing simple, low-paying jobs, facing life on his own for the first time without anyone paving the way. He worked in warehousing, cleaning, even delivery. Manual labor he once looked down on. Sometimes Sean appeared tired, awkward when talking about the future, but I saw my brother no longer blaming others or complaining as before. "I'm trying, bro," he said during one meeting, gazing out the window. "I'm getting used to handling things myself. Before I thought money came easy, but now I know you have to earn it, little by little." I listened, emotions mixed, uneasy, wondering if he had truly changed, heartbroken at the steep price, yet relieved to see him learning to stand on his own. Over time, in those rare contacts, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year, I saw Sean speak less, boast less, no longer mentioning money or big opportunities. He talked about daily work, new co-workers in a calm voice. "I learned a lot in prison, bro," he admitted once as we sat in the park near my house. "No one to shield me anymore. I have to face things myself." I didn't dare claim my brother had changed completely. Old traces remained, like avoiding eye contact when the past came up. But I clearly saw one thing. Sean was learning to accept his own limits. No more fantasies of quick riches, no more exploiting my name or anyone else's. He lived simply, self-reliantly, and for the first time I saw him as a true adult. That Christmas, when Lucas was 4 years old, the whole family gathered for the first time in years after all the turmoil. I hesitated when accepting the invitation from my parents, but Emily persuaded me. "Give it a try, for the chance to heal our family. For Lucas." We went to the old house, bringing small gifts for everyone. The atmosphere was quieter and more restrained than past holidays. No dazzling lights, no overflowing table like that fateful night. My parents welcomed us with weary smiles. Sean sat in the corner wearing a simple sweater. No obvious favoritism, no one placed at the center to be protected at all costs. I saw my parents treating their children more cautiously, listening better and knowing when to stop. When Lucas ran to hug his grandparents, Dad smiled. "My grandson's growing so fast." Mom asked Emily about work without interrupting or demanding. Sean sat nearby, playing with Lucas using wooden toys, voice gentle. "I made this myself for him." I also noticed Sean at the dinner table with rare humility. No demands, no complaints, just quietly present as an ordinary family member. He poured water for everyone, asked Lucas about preschool without boasting about anything. As the meal began, simple roasted turkey, salad, pudding, the mood wasn't lively as before, but genuine. Dad raised his glass. "Merry Christmas." Everyone nodded, and I felt a flutter of nerves. Would something erupt? But no, everything remained peaceful. In that moment, looking around the table, Emily holding Lucas, my parents smiling wearily, Sean silent. I understood that real change doesn't come from punishment or shielding, but from each person facing their own consequences. Sean went to prison to learn responsibility. My parents lost everything to recognize their mistakes, and I lost my old family to find new peace. I drew a clear lesson for myself and my son. Love only has meaning when paired with boundaries, and responsibility cannot be handed over to someone else. Watching Lucas play with Sean, I thought about how I would teach him. You have to face your own consequences, but Dad will always be here if you try. For me, that Christmas wasn't perfect. There were still slightly awkward silences, old memories occasionally flashing by. But for the first time in a long while, the whole family truly sat together in respect and fairness. No one demanded anything. The familiar favoritism was gone. We ate, chatted about the weather, about Lucas, small, safe topics. As we left, Dad hugged me lightly and whispered, "Thank you for coming." I nodded, emotions swirling inside, not complete, but enough to know things had changed. My story ends on a simple belief. The past cannot be altered, but the future can still be different if each person learns to take responsibility for their own life. What happened doesn't vanish, but it no longer controls me as before. On the drive home, Christmas lights gradually faded behind us, blurring through the window. Emily turned to me, voice soft and caring. "Are you okay? After all this?" I looked straight ahead at the road, feeling each breath clearly, then smiled faintly. "I'm okay. Not because everything's easier, but because my heart feels lighter." In the back seat, Lucas slept soundly, breathing evenly, so peaceful it made me slow down for a few seconds to glance at him in the rearview mirror. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a perfect Christmas, but it was a true one. Not to forget the past, but to move forward without it holding me back. This was a different Christmas, and for the first time in a long while, it truly felt like mine. It 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 felt like mine.